June 11, 1944. Task Force 58, Majuro Atoll, Marshall Islands. The signal bridge. Radio static crackled across the carrier wave frequency as encrypted operational orders transformed into tactical directives. Operation Forager commence. Proceed to Marianas. Execute air superiority operations against Japanese positions Saipan, Tinian, Guam. Maintain fleet readiness for anticipated enemy carrier response. Vice Admiral Marc Mitscher lowered his binoculars and turned to his operations officer. 15 fleet carriers, 7 battleships, 21 cruisers, 69 destroyers. The assembled task force represented the largest concentration of naval aviation power ever assembled. What none of them could fully anticipate was that this single operation would trigger the most devastating carrier battle in naval history, effectively destroying Japanese naval aviation forever. The Pacific War had taught American planners that aircraft carriers were not just mobile airfields. They were the decisive weapons of modern naval warfare. Control the skies and you controlled the seas. Control the seas, and you could project power across the vast Pacific distances that had once protected Japan. The Essex-Class carriers represented America's industrial answer to the strategic equation of Pacific warfare. Task Force 58 cut through Pacific swells at 25 knots, the massive Essex-Class carriers displacing 27,100 tons of seawater at standard load. Each ship stretched 872 feet in length, with a beam of 93 feet. Vice Admiral Mitscher stood on the flag bridge of USS Lexington, studying the formations spread across 40 miles of ocean. His command included 7 Essex-Class carriers, USS Essex, USS Yorktown, USS Hornet, USS Bunker Hill, USS Wasp, USS Lexington, and USS Enterprise, along with 8 Independence-class light carriers, including USS Belleau Wood, USS Bataan, USS Monterey, USS Cabot, USS San Jacinto, USS Princeton, USS Langley, and USS Cowpens. Each Essex-class carrier housed 3,448 men and an air group of 90 aircraft. The ships carried 4 squadrons, 36 F6F Hellcat fighters, 36 SB-2C Helldiver dive bombers, and 18 TBF Avenger torpedo bombers. The mathematics of carrier warfare were elegant in their simplicity. 900 aircraft operating from mobile platforms that could position themselves anywhere across the Pacific. Each carrier possessed 4 elevators capable of cycling aircraft between the hangar deck and flight deck in 45 seconds. The flight deck catapults could launch an aircraft every 30 seconds during surge operations. Captain Arleigh Burke, Mitscher's Chief of Staff, had calculated the tactical implications with characteristic precision. Harvard Law School graduate turned naval strategist, Burke understood that carrier warfare was ultimately about time and space equations, launch cycles, recovery windows, fuel consumption rates, ammunition expenditure. The difference between victory and defeat often came down to minutes in launch timing and nautical miles in positioning. Aboard the Japanese carrier Taiho, Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa reviewed his operational orders for Operation Eigo. The newest and largest carrier in the Imperial Japanese Navy, Taiho displaced 29,300 tons and carried 75 aircraft. Her armored flight deck, unique among Japanese carriers, was designed to withstand 500-pound bomb hits. 9 carriers with 430 aircraft represented Japan's last concentrated carrier striking force. The first mobile fleet included the veterans Shokaku and Zuikaku, survivors of Pearl Harbor, along with fleet carriers Junyo and Hiyo. light carriers Ryuho, Chitose, Chiyoda, and Zuiho. But the numbers concealed a fatal weakness that plagued all Japanese carrier operations by mid-1944. Pilot quality had deteriorated catastrophically. Where Pearl Harbor veterans had averaged 700 hours of flight time, the pilots aboard Ozawa's carriers averaged fewer than 275 hours. Some had as little as 100 hours total flight time. The mathematics of attrition had destroyed Japanese naval aviation as surely as any weapon. The Imperial Navy had lost over 400 experienced pilots at Midway, another 250 at Eastern Solomons and Santa Cruz, and hundreds more during the grinding Solomons campaign. The American carriers formed into 4 task groups as they approached the Marianas on June 11th. Task Group 58.1 under Rear Admiral Joseph Jocko Clark, with carriers Hornet, Yorktown, Belleau Wood and Bataan. Task Group 58.2 commanded by Rear Admiral Alfred Montgomery, with Bunker Hill, Wasp, Monterey and Cabot. Task Group 58.3 led by Rear Admiral John Reeves with Flagship Enterprise, Lexington, San Jacinto and Princeton. Task Group 58.4 under Rear Admiral William Harrell with Essex, Langley and Copens. At 1300 hours on June 11th, the first Essex-Class fighter sweep launched against Japanese airfields in the Marianas. Lieutenant Commander Charles Brewer, commanding VF-15 from USS Essex, led 32 Hellcats toward Saipan's Azlito airfield. The Grumman F6F Hellcat represented everything the Essex-class carriers embodied: superiority through industrial mass production. Powered by a 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, the Hellcat could reach 380 miles per hour and climb to 20,000 feet in 7 minutes. Radar operator First Class James Chen aboard USS Essex tracked the fighter sweep on his SK air search radar. The system could detect aircraft at ranges up to 100 miles and altitudes up to 30,000 feet. Stop every few degrees, analyze the return signal, calculate range and bearing. The Marianas air defense consisted of approximately 500 Japanese aircraft, but only half were operational. At 1335, Brewer's Hellcats encountered the first Japanese defenders. 30 Mitsubishi A6M0s rose to intercept, but the engagement was brutally one-sided. The Zero, revolutionary in 1940, was now catastrophically obsolete. Maximum speed of 331 miles per hour. Climb rate to 20,000 feet required 9.5 minutes. No armor protection for the pilot. No self-sealing fuel tanks. Most critically, the Japanese pilots averaged less than 200 hours of flight time, with many having fewer than 100 hours. The first day's combat over the Marianas destroyed 147 Japanese aircraft for the loss of 11 American planes. Commander David McCampbell, commanding Air Group 15 from Essex, would later describe it as clubbing baby seals. The Japanese pilots flew predictable patterns, failed to maintain formation integrity, and showed poor gunnery skills. Their tactical communications were confused and contradictory. Japanese naval intelligence monitoring American radio traffic from Tawi-Tawi began to understand the magnitude of the threat. Emergency messages went out to Admiral Ozawa, ordering the mobile fleet to sortie immediately for the decisive battle. Operation Ago was activated. The plan called for land-based aircraft from the Marianas to attack and damage the American carriers, allowing Ozawa's carrier aircraft to deliver the killing blow. On June 13th, cryptanalysts at Fleet Radio Unit Pacific intercepted and decoded Japanese message traffic revealing Ozawa's intentions. The mobile fleet would sortie from Tawi-Tawi, refuel in the Philippine Sea, then attack the American invasion force at Saipan. Admiral Raymond Spruance, commanding Fifth Fleet, made the critical decision that would shape the battle. Rather than pursue the Japanese fleet, Task Force 58 would remain tied to the invasion beaches, forcing Ozawa to come to them. Executive Officer John Williamson aboard USS Yorktown calculated the tactical geometry. Japanese carrier aircraft had longer range than their American counterparts. Zeros could fly 1,940 miles on internal fuel. Kates and Vals had similar endurance. American Hellcats had a combat radius of 340 miles, Helldivers 276 miles, Avengers 275 miles. This meant Ozawa could launch strikes from beyond American striking range, a critical tactical advantage. But Williamson understood what the Japanese had apparently forgotten. Modern carrier warfare was not about individual aircraft performance, but integrated system capabilities. Radar-directed fighter control, proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells, damage control procedures, communications discipline. The Essex-Class carriers possessed overwhelming advantages in every category except aircraft range. At 21:30 on June 18th, submarine USS Kavala detected the Japanese mobile fleet 360 miles west-southwest of Saipan. Lieutenant Commander Herman Kostler tracked the enemy formation for 6 hours, transmitting contact reports that reached Spruance by 0300 on June 19th. The Japanese were approaching from the west, apparently unaware their position was known. Dawn on June 19th, 1944. Weather conditions were ideal for carrier operations. Ceiling unlimited, visibility 40 miles, moderate easterly trade winds at 14 knots, sea state 3 with long Pacific swells. Perfect flying weather for what would become the largest carrier battle in history. At 0730, radar operators aboard USS Yorktown detected the first Japanese strike wave at 140 miles range. 69 aircraft approaching from the west at 18,000 feet. Fighter Direction Officer Lieutenant Joseph Eggert began vectoring combat air patrol fighters to intercept. The new Grumman F6F Hellcats, armed with 6.50 caliber machine guns carrying 400 rounds per gun, climbed toward the incoming raid. Lieutenant Alex Vraciu, flying from USS Lexington, was among the first to engage. An ace with 12 previous victories, Vraciu would later describe the interception. "I couldn't believe it. They were flying in perfect formation like it was an air show. No weaving, no cover, just straight and level." In 8 minutes of combat, Vraciu shot down 6 Japanese aircraft, becoming an ace in a day. The Japanese strike leader, Lieutenant Commander Akira Tarui from carrier Taiho, had never faced radar-directed fighter interception. His pilots, averaging 150 hours flight time, were unprepared for the coordinated Hellcat attacks. American fighters engaged from above and behind, using superior speed and firepower to devastating effect. Of 69 aircraft in the first wave, 42 were shot down before reaching the American fleet. At 0910, submarine USS Albacore fired 6 torpedoes at carrier Taiho from 5,000 yards. One torpedo struck the carrier's aviation fuel system, causing vapor leaks that would prove fatal. Damage Control Officer Commander Yutaka Kobayashi ordered ventilation systems reversed to clear the fumes, inadvertently spreading aviation gasoline vapors throughout the ship. The second Japanese strike wave, 128 aircraft strong, arrived at 1000 hours. Radar-directed Hellcats intercepted at 60 miles from the fleet. Lieutenant Commander Charles Brewer, leading VF-15 from Essex, described the engagement. It was like a training exercise. They flew straight into our guns without taking evasive action. My wingman asked if we were really in combat. 97 Japanese aircraft were destroyed in the second wave. American anti-aircraft fire, directed by Mark 37 gun directors with radar ranging, created a wall of steel around the carriers. The new proximity-fused shells detonated within lethal range of aircraft without requiring direct hits. Japanese pilots who survived would report that American ships seemed surrounded by an impenetrable shield of explosions. At 12:20, submarine USS Kavala put 4 torpedoes into veteran carrier Shokaku. Captain Hiroshi Matsubara ordered counter-flooding, but the damage was catastrophic. Shokaku had survived Coral Sea and Eastern Solomons, but 9 months of constant operations without proper maintenance had weakened her damage control capabilities. Aviation fuel leaked from ruptured tanks. Electrical systems failed. 3 hours later, Shokaku sank with 1,263 men. The third Japanese wave of 47 aircraft launched at 1000 reached the American fleet at 1300. Only 7 returned to their carriers. Fighter pilot Ensign Kanayoshi Muto, one of the few survivors, would later testify, "The American fighters were everywhere, above us, beside us, behind us. Their tactics were perfect. We never had a chance." Admiral Ozawa, unaware of his mounting losses, ordered a 4th strike of 82 aircraft at 11:30. Confused by poor communications and navigation errors, this wave split into 2 groups. One group of 33 aircraft flew north and found nothing. The other 49 aircraft encountered Task Group 58.2. American Hellcats destroyed 30 aircraft in 12 minutes. At 14:52, a massive explosion destroyed carrier Taiho. The accumulated aviation fuel vapors had reached critical concentration. The detonation broke the carrier's back, sending her to the bottom with 1,650 men, including Admiral Ozawa's air staff. Ozawa himself survived, transferring his flag to cruiser Haguro, but effective command and control of the mobile fleet had ceased. By sunset on June 19th, the Japanese had launched 373 carrier aircraft. Only 130 returned. American losses totaled 29 aircraft in air-to-air combat, with most pilots recovered. The kill ratio exceeded 10-1, the most lopsided air combat result of the entire war. American pilots, averaging 300 to 500 hours of flight time, had systematically destroyed their opponents. At 15:40 on June 20th, search aircraft from USS Enterprise located the retreating Japanese fleet 275 miles west-northwest of Task Force 58. The range was extreme, beyond the normal combat radius of American aircraft. Recovery would occur after dark, something carrier aviation doctrine strongly discouraged. But Mitscher understood this might be the only opportunity to complete the destruction of Japanese carrier aviation. At 16:21, Mitscher gave the order, "Launch everything you've got." 240 aircraft launched in 10 minutes from 11 carriers. 85 Hellcats, 77 dive bombers, 54 torpedo bombers. Fuel calculations were critical. Each pilot knew they had exactly enough fuel for the strike and return, with no margin for error. Lieutenant Commander James Jig Dog Ramage, leading Bombing Squadron 10 from Enterprise, briefed his pilots. "Gentlemen, this is a one-way ticket unless you watch your fuel. Lean mixture, optimal cruise settings, no unnecessary maneuvering. We get one pass at the target, then it's a straight line home. The American strike found the Japanese fleet at sunset. In the fading light, carrier Hyo took multiple torpedo hits from Avengers of Belleau Wood. The old carrier, converted from a passenger liner, had inadequate subdivision. She sank in 2 hours with 250 men. Carriers Shokaku and Chiyoda were damaged, along with battleship Haruna. The return flight became an epic of navigation and endurance. As darkness fell, aircraft began running out of fuel. Pilots ditched beside destroyers when engines quit. Others made it to the vicinity of the task force but couldn't find their carriers in the darkness. At 20:45, Mitscher made the decision that would become legendary. Turn on the lights. Every ship in Task Force 58 illuminated. Searchlights pointed vertically. Running lights blazed. Flight deck lights outlined landing areas. Star shells burst overhead. For 2 hours the fleet recovered aircraft, many landing on any available deck. 80 aircraft were lost, but most pilots were rescued. The mission had cost American carrier aviation dearly, but Japanese carrier power was finished. By dawn on June 21st, the scale of the Japanese catastrophe was becoming clear. In 2 days of combat, the Imperial Japanese Navy had lost 3 fleet carriers, Taiho, Shokaku, and Hyo. More critically, they had lost between 476 and 600 aircraft, including land-based planes, and approximately 445 aircrew. The survivors flying back to Ozawa's remaining carriers possessed neither the skill nor experience to conduct offensive operations. American losses totaled 123 aircraft, with 76 aircrew killed. More importantly, Task Force 58 still possessed over 750 operational aircraft with trained pilots. The industrial mathematics were inexorable. American training programs were producing 2,000 new naval aviators per month. Each pilot received 500 hours of flight training, including 50 hours in operational aircraft types. Advanced training included radar interception, night operations, and instrument flying. Japanese pilot training had collapsed to 100 to 150 hours total, with many pilots receiving as little as 50 hours in operational types. Fuel shortages limited training flights. Experienced instructors had been recalled to combat units. The accelerated programs produced pilots who could barely take off and land, let alone engage in combat maneuvering. Commander David McCampbell, who would become the Navy's leading ace with 34 victories, analyzed the tactical implications. By June 1944, we weren't fighting the Japanese Navy that attacked Pearl Harbor. Those pilots were dead. We were fighting kids who could barely fly. The Essex carriers and their air groups were weapons designed for industrial warfare, and Japan couldn't compete. Statistical analysis revealed the devastating efficiency of American carrier operations. Each Essex-Class carrier could launch a full strike of 40 aircraft in 12 minutes. Recovery operations required 18 minutes. Rearming and refueling took 45 minutes. In theory, each carrier could generate 3 full strikes in 4 hours. With 15 carriers operating in coordination, Task Force 58 could put 600 aircraft over a target simultaneously. The Battle of the Philippine Sea shattered Japanese naval aviation beyond recovery. Admiral Toyoda's subsequent assessment was blunt. The first mobile fleet has been rendered ineffective as an offensive force. Our carrier pilot strength is exhausted. We must adopt alternative tactics. Those alternative tactics would manifest 4 months later as kamikaze attacks, the desperate resort of a navy that could no longer train conventional pilots. Vice Admiral Ozawa, rescued from the water after Taiho's sinking, submitted his final report on June 24th. The enemy's radar-controlled interception was perfect. Their pilots displayed overwhelming superiority in every aspect of air combat. Our attacks were defeated before they could reach effective range. The mobile fleet's air groups have ceased to exist as a combat force. The Essex-Class carriers had validated the American approach to naval warfare through industrial mass production. Each ship incorporated lessons learned from previous combat. Improved ventilation systems prevented the accumulation of explosive vapors. Enhanced damage control training meant that even severely damaged ships like USS Franklin and USS Bunker Hill would survive attacks that would have sunk earlier designs. Production statistics revealed the futility of Japanese resistance. By June 1944, American shipyards had commissioned 7 Essex-class carriers, with 17 more under construction. The Newport News Shipbuilding Company alone was launching 1 carrier every 6 months. Total construction time had been reduced to 14 months through standardized components and assembly line techniques. The technological gap was equally decisive. American radar systems provided 100-mile detection ranges with height-finding capability. The Mark 37 gun director with Mark 12 radar could track aircraft at 40,000 yards. VT proximity fuses increased anti-aircraft lethality by 300%. Combat information centers coordinated defensive efforts with unprecedented efficiency. Japanese technology remained frozen at 1941 levels. The Zero fighter, revolutionary at war's beginning, had received only minor improvements. Radar systems were primitive and unreliable. Communications equipment was obsolete. Most critically, Japan lacked the industrial capacity to incorporate combat lessons into new designs. Training programs revealed the strategic divergence between the combatants. The U.S. Navy Training Command operated 14 air stations with 10,000 training aircraft. Monthly pilot production exceeded losses by a factor of 3. Each pilot progressed through primary, basic, advanced, and operational training phases. Combat veterans rotated home as instructors, ensuring tactical lessons were immediately incorporated into curriculum. Japanese training had collapsed into abbreviated programs producing marginally qualified pilots. The Yorktown program, which had produced elite naval aviators before 1942, was reduced to teaching basic flying skills. Advanced combat training was eliminated due to fuel shortages. Formation flying, gunnery practice, and navigation training were minimal or non-existent. The human cost was staggering. Of the 450 Japanese air crew lost in the Philippine Sea, most were irreplaceable veterans with over a year of combat experience. Their loss meant that institutional knowledge of carrier operations died with them. The survivors lacked the experience to train replacements or develop new tactics. American personnel policies ensured continuity of experience. Combat tours were limited to preserve veteran pilots. Rotation policies meant that every squadron contained a mixture of veterans and newcomers. Experienced pilots were assigned to training commands after completing combat tours. This systematic approach to human resource management proved as decisive as technological superiority. By October 1944, when the Imperial Japanese Navy made its final gambit at Leyte Gulf, the carrier force that had stunned the world at Pearl Harbor no longer existed. 4 carriers sailed with Admiral Ozawa as a sacrificial decoy force, carrying only 108 aircraft with half-trained pilots. The engagement off Cape Engano was less a battle than an execution. American carrier aircraft sank all 4 Japanese carriers while losing only 10 aircraft. The Essex-Class carriers would continue operations throughout the Pacific War, but their greatest victory had already been won. In 2 days over the Philippine Sea, they had achieved what 3 years of grinding attrition had failed to accomplish: the complete destruction of Japanese naval aviation as an effective fighting force. Admiral Chester Nimitz's assessment was characteristically understated. The Essex-class carriers and their air groups represented American industrial democracy at war. Mass production, technological innovation, and systematic training created a weapon system that the Japanese could neither match nor counter. The Battle of the Philippine Sea was not just a tactical victory, but a validation of the American approach to modern warfare. The legacy extended beyond World War II. 24 Essex-class carriers were completed, serving through Korea, Vietnam, and into the 1970s. USS Lexington, survivor of the Philippine Sea battle, remained in commission until 1991, a testament to the robust design that had revolutionized naval warfare. In the depths of the Pacific Ocean, 3 Japanese carriers rest on the seabed, their aircraft still in their hangars, their pilots at their stations. They stand as monuments to the last moment when individual skill and courage might have overcome industrial mass production. But mathematics, as Executive Officer Williamson had understood, was inexorable. The Essex-class carriers had not just won a battle. They had demonstrated that future naval warfare belonged to nations capable of mobilizing industrial democracy, technological innovation, and systematic training on a massive scale. The Philippine Sea marked the end of an era when naval aviation was an art practiced by elite warriors. The future belonged to nations that could transform warfare into an industrial process, where victory was determined not by individual heroism, but by production statistics, training hours, and technological specifications. The Essex-class carriers, products of American shipyards and crewed by citizen sailors, had forever changed the nature of naval warfare.